What's up, guys? I was watching this interview on YouTube, and it was between two monks and Yuval Noah Harari. I got quite a few takeaways from it, and I wanted to reflect on one in particular today. So there was a bit in the interview where he talks about how if the mind is given an easy thing to do and a hard thing to do, it tends to default, it'll tend to take the easy task rather than the hard task. And in the example he gave, it was the example where when we're meditating, we'd give ourselves the goal of sitting for long periods, which is a seemingly hard task, but relative to the actual task or the right thing to do, which is to observe objectively and not react, it's a relatively easy task, which is why having that as a goal is the wrong goal and diverts our attention from the actual task, which is problematic. The diversion from the actual task is particularly elusive, I guess. It's somewhat disguised and hard to see because the task we're opting to do is quite challenging and can easily be confused as something noble to do, as something worthwhile to pursue, and it's much harder to see compared to an example where what we're being distracted by is completely unrelated, like scrolling Facebook, for example. So if someone were to say, instead of meditating today, I'm just going to go scroll Facebook, or I'm just going to completely skip it and go watch a movie. I mean, it's so obvious that we're skipping what we're meant to do. We're not going along with our original intention, and we're sort of getting distracted from what we want to do. But if someone were to say, I'm going to sit down and meditate and try to sit an hour without moving or 2 hours without moving, and overemphasize that fact, it sort of sounds like, on the surface level, it sounds pretty respectable, and it sounds like they're putting in the hard work and taking steps in the right direction. But in this example, he's saying, if you give yourself that task and you also give yourself the task of observing your sensations objectively without reacting, that's the actual practice, and that's actually the hard thing to do. And relative to that, when you're focusing on purely the duration for which you sit, that's actually the relatively easy thing to do, which in this case is the distraction from what you're meant to do, right? So that's why it's harder to see, because you're still sitting down and closing your eyes and meditating. You're not completely sort of dismissing the activity or slacking off on it, but you're missing the point in a nuanced way. So I thought that was such a cool example. And especially when he expanded further and he was like, well, if you take someone off the street and you tell them don't move for an hour and keep still, incentivize them enough, they're going to do it. Give them $1 million and they're going to be able to do it. However, if you tell someone to focus on their breath continuously for a couple minutes, they're not going to be able to do it, no matter how much you incentivize them, because that's their truly hard task. I think it's just the way he explained it is quite suitable with me. And so yeah, it's a really good reminder in terms of meditation for me to practice properly. I started then extrapolating, and I was like, so where else could I be doing that in my day-to-day where there's the right thing to do and I'm confusing myself and perhaps doing the hard thing and being unaware of the fact that I'm not doing the right thing, right? So I thought a bit and I found a few examples. Maybe they're relatable, maybe they're not. Who knows? But then hopefully it's useful or helpful in some way. So I had an example from work where I try to be very effective and very efficient, which means I'm trying to achieve like a high output in general, but also a high output in a low amount of time, right? That is actually something which is hard to do. However, what I tend to feel when I'm doing that, when I go about my work, is I've tended to feel overwhelmed, and I burnt out 2 times last year, and often my stress level increases when it comes to crunch time at work. So here's an example where I think getting the high output or being able to work quick or being very productive and efficient, it's hard, but relative to the hard thing, it's actually a bit easy. And in my case, the hard thing, which I actually want to do, is to be able to work with a balanced mind and not get too stressed and lose the balance of my mind when it comes in periods of high pressure and delivery, right? So what I need to remind myself is that I need to prioritize working with a balanced mind from a meditation point of view. I think that's more relatable for people who are into meditation and stuff, but maybe a bit more relatable in general is to have a high output without the risk of burning out, right? It's probably easier and more relatable for someone who isn't into meditation to be aware if they're working towards burnout, or they're working in a way which is taking steps towards burning out, or they're working in a way which is sustainable yet effective, right? I want to work with a balanced mind, and I want to work in a way which isn't conducive to burning out and not letting the stress levels rise too high. Because I definitely think you could still be productive and have the high output whilst increasing your stress levels. But the ideal I want to work towards is having that output, but doing it in a way where the mind can stay balanced and is relatively not that stressed. Or at least it's not feeling that much stress from a psychological point of view. So yeah. So that's one example. It relates to work, where it's like the way I'm inclined towards is hard, and it's not the lazy path. It's not unproductive, but compared to the path I want to take, it's a relatively easy one. And I do notice myself inclining towards that. It mirrors that meditation example where it's like, well, sitting for long hours is hard, but it's actually missing the point and missing the actual practice, right? If that's what we're focusing on and emphasizing. Another example, at nighttime, I'm often learning and studying, and I've always struggled with sleeping at the right time and waking at the right time pretty much my whole life, unless there are very strong conditions such as like an appointment or a meeting. But these days when I'm working from home, it's easier to sleep in because I don't have the commute and I don't end up waking up as early as I'd like or sleeping as early as I'd like. When I'm on meditation retreat, it's really easy just because the conditions are so ideal, right? You don't have things to distract you at nighttime. You're not allowed to read. You're not allowed to have any technology, etc. And in the morning, there's a bell that goes off and it's meditation time. So the routine is very structured and set. So it's much easier for me to be an early riser in those kind of conditions. But when I'm at home, I've got to admit, it's much harder. Now, how does this relate to the original example? Well, I'm often learning at night, and then that can also be confused as the right thing to do because learning is useful, it's good for you, it's one of my goals, it's in line with my goals. But the thing is, doing it at nighttime, it sort of makes me feel justified in not having good sleep hygiene, which is something I was reflecting on with this example. It's like That is a somewhat hard thing to do, arguably, to keep studying into the night when you're working full time. But actually, it's an easy habit of mine. And the thing I actually want to do and would be more valuable for me is to actually sleep on time, which is pretty important. And that's the actual hard thing that I'm procrastinating on by studying at night, right? Two seemingly hard things, but the relatively easy of them is actually a distraction from the actual thing we want to do. In general, being busy also applies here, like being busy in general. So I think a lot of the times we keep ourselves busy and we do a lot of things relatively hard, but a lot of it is actually easier than confronting some problems that are in front of us. So it's a lot easier than prioritizing and saying no to things. Saying yes to everything is hard because then you have to juggle a lot of things and you feel stressed out and you have such a high workload. But in some sense, it's relatively easy compared to just saying no and facing the reality that we don't have enough time to do everything and that we've got to cut down and prioritize, and facing the fact that even out of everything we want to do, we're not going to get every single thing done. Anyway, so I thought it was a really inspiring interview. I'll link it in the description below. That was just one example that came from it, and it was really a meditation related interview, and it just made me reflect on a few other examples in my life that weren't meditation related, jumping a bit all over the place, but I just wanted to share. Hopefully something was useful if you watched it this far. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.